The price of gold has had a meteoric rise to over $4,000 an ounce this year. Tariffs, deglobalization, wars, and most of all, the fear of currency devaluation all have investors increasingly nervous. So they flock to gold as the ultimate safe haven asset. It's sound, divisible, scarce, portable, durable, and with thousands of years of track record. Just perfect. But let's be honest, we all already know this. There is, however, something we tend to forget about gold. In a real systemic crisis, the gold is supposed to protect you from. Prices aren't the only thing that move. The rules do as well. And when rules change, gold's biggest strength usually becomes its greatest weakness. Simply put, the way most people hold their gold has a fundamental security gap that exposes you to total loss through seizure by the government, making gold not as safe as many people think. Don't get me wrong, in today's video, we will not argue that gold is a bad investment. Not at all, actually. That would be stupid. Instead, we'll discuss, number one, the most infamous example of large-scale gold confiscation, that of Executive Order 6102 in America during the Great Depression. Second, we'll take a look at how most people, and probably you, hold their gold nowadays, and why that's quite risky. To last but not least, finally understand how you can protect your hard-earned gold to make it crisis-proof. Let's get right to it. As a quick disclaimer, guys, there are a lot of AI YouTube channels emerging these days that talk a lot about finance, money, history, and so forth. In my opinion, watching such stuff is really awful because you entirely outsource your brain to robots controlled by forces none of us really understand. For my videos, I do a lot of in-depth research using news articles, academic research, and even books. Of course, I use ChatGPT to double-check my thinking and to help brainstorm, but at the end of the day, my videos consist of real human effort. For sure, I'll make some mistakes, but at least there's soul and authenticity in my work. If you appreciate this, a like, comment, and subscribe would be greatly appreciated. But without further ado, let's get back to the video. Roosevelt comes to power. The year is 1933, and the situation was dire in the US. Dire to a degree that we haven't experienced since in America. The unemployment rate was at over 25%. Not just briefly, but high for many, many years. The stock market crashed by around 90%, an insane number. There is also debilitating deflation. Now, there are various types of deflation, but the deflation during the Great Depression was quite horrid. It made debts impossible to repay because the value of the debt kept on rising, and that in turn killed off most investment by the private sector. People either didn't take on new debt, or they were crushed by their old debt. Families that were middle or even upper class a few years prior were lining up to get food handouts. There are bankruptcies, unrest, revolt, and desperation. To be honest, I think it's very difficult for us to imagine how quickly stuff turned from the roaring golden 20s to the bleak and dismal 30s. Sometimes all it takes is a few weeks to turn the world upside down. Anyway, while the Great Depression famously started in 1929, it only reached its peak when President Franklin Delano Roosevelt came to power in 1933. FDR, as his name is commonly abbreviated, came in with a hammer. He was not shy of unprecedented decisions, especially relating to gold. His approach to put America back to work was through a series of programs and extensive regulations now famously called the New Deal. Things like Social Security, the FDIC, and even the SEC all emerged from the New Deal. Most revolutionary about this was that Roosevelt parted with the libertarian traditions of America to instead fund his ambitious plans through massive government spending. Unlike presidents nowadays, however, Roosevelt's economic policy was much more restricted by the gold standard, at least initially. It's not like Trump or Biden that just printed trillions of dollars to keep the economy alive during the pandemic. FDR had to be much more sneaky to fight the debilitating deflation. And speaking of gold, not only did it tie Roosevelt's hands, but it also exacerbated deflation. The way the dollar worked back then was that the Federal Reserve was required to keep 40% of outstanding dollars in gold. And to emphasize, that gold was convertible. So when the Depression kept on getting worse, more and more people took their dollars to a Federal Reserve Bank and converted them for gold, which added even more deflationary pressure to the system because the converted dollars were taken out of the system. If that was too complicated, I'll give you a simple TLDR. Roosevelt wanted to stimulate the economy through government spending, but because of the gold standard, he couldn't create more dollars. His hands were tied. He needed to have 40% of all dollars backed by their equivalent value in gold. Government gold reserves didn't go down that much during the Great Depression. All it took was to get close to this 40% mark. This exactly happened and reached its culmination in March of 1933 when the Federal Reserve Bank of New York could no longer honor its commitment to convert currency to gold. Coincidentally, this was right around when FDR was inaugurated as president, and what happened next was truly one of the most unprecedented and aggressive government actions in US history. Executive Order 6102.
Under Executive Order of the President issued April 5, 1933, all persons are required to deliver on or before May 1st all gold coin, gold bullion, and gold certificates now owned by them to a Federal Reserve Bank, branch, or agency.
I created this with an AI version of Roosevelt. Pretty cool, I think. Imagine nowadays having 10 or 20 or even more percent of your portfolio allocated to gold, waking up and reading such an announcement on X these days. It would make your heart stop, which is exactly why I made this video. FDR's Executive Order 6102 required everyone to hand in their monetary gold to the government in exchange for paper dollars at the fixed price of $20 per ounce. I will emphasize this because it's very, very drastic. You weren't really allowed to own gold anymore. Declaration of Independence, Constitution, Bill of Rights, States' Rights, didn't matter. Sure, there are some provisions that you were allowed to keep a bit of jewelry or dental gold, but other than that, your gold was now illegal. And it wasn't just American citizens, by the way. It was also companies and corporations from abroad, like the Swiss Übersee Finanzkooperation AG. This Swiss company entrusted some of its gold to an American firm for safekeeping, and they must have been quite shocked when they woke up one day and their gold was confiscated. What sounds like a policy from 1930s Germany or the Soviet Union was actually a pillar of FDR's New Deal. Now, some people might say that it wasn't really confiscation or seizure because you got dollars in return for your gold, but that's just a cute opinion. You are forced to sell your gold to the government at below market prices. It's like if you buy an iPhone for $1,000 and then you have to sell it to me right after for $500. It's a great deal for me, but I'm effectively stealing from you. Now, as a question, why did Roosevelt want the gold? Was he just trying to irk his population? No, of course not. Executive Order 6102 was part of a phased plan. Once enough people turned in their gold in the months after, the US government did something super sneaky. It officially repriced gold from $20 per ounce to $35 per ounce in 1934. So the US took gold from its people, gave them $20 per ounce, and then once it had finally enough, it officially repriced this newly gained gold to $35. That was an accounting trick to enrich itself, but effectively it was theft. And with that, Roosevelt could expand the money supply and fund a lot of his New Deal agenda. Now, I think that's enough for our little history excursion, but I do want to say one more thing. If it sounds like I'm hating on FDR, that's actually not what I'm trying to do. Many celebrate him as the man that got America out of the Depression. Others consider him the most authoritarian president in US history. The 1930s were a time of drastic government action all over the world. This decade represented a monumental shift from the libertarian bourgeois orders of the Industrial Revolution to the new managerial orders of the age of mass and scale. Different expressions of this were happening simultaneously in Nazi Germany, the Soviet Union, Japan, and so forth. What was distinctively better about the American approach was that it didn't abandon its Christian morality in the process, something that sadly did happen in Europe with the new attempts at religion and morality that so famously ended in the deaths of millions. Going back to gold, if you've been attentively listening, you already know what the cardinal flaw of gold ownership is that I'm alluding to. In times of crisis, like the Great Depression, governments invariably run out of money. And when that happens, they pretty much always force their monopoly money onto us and try to hoard our gold. If you think that you're somehow immune from it because you live in a peaceful country nowadays, think again. It happened pretty much everywhere at least once in the last 100 years. Now, I'm not trying to say that you shouldn't own gold. What I'm trying to say is two things instead, which we'll discuss for the remainder of the video. If you own gold to protect yourself from systemic risk, the way you own gold matters a lot. And second, having a plan for when crisis hits is indispensable. Now let's look at how most people own their gold nowadays, and probably also how you own your gold. First, let me give you a fun fact. It's actually interesting how little gold there is on the planet. All available gold that we've mined can be put into 3 to 4 Olympic-sized swimming pools, which is really very little actually. You can see this diagram from the World Gold Council on the different categories of gold ownership. Points 5 and 6 are how much gold is estimated to be in the ground and economically extractable. Point 3 is untouchable unless you plan a GTA type heist on your central bank. So if you own some gold, most likely you fall into categories 1 and 2, either jewelry or bars and coins, which includes ETFs. Assuming that most of my viewers are on the younger side, living in city apartments, you probably don't have a big safe in your basement or country house. You probably invested in gold via an ETF. If we take a look here, the biggest gold ETF is the SPDR Gold Shares ETF, traded on the New York Stock Exchange. According to them, the gold bullion is held by its custodian, HSBC Bank USA, in its London vaults, or in the vaults of sub-custodians. And ladies and gentlemen, that right there should make alarm bells go off in your heads. While these vaults are almost certainly safe for Mission Impossible type heists, there is no safety from government confiscation. What would happen, for example, if in this case the British government were to go rogue? If they deem it necessary, they could nationalize the gold in the HSBC vaults and take it all. Which gets us to the punchline of this video. My main argument is not that you should not own gold. Gold is a timeless investment that has transcended the millennia and has accompanied humanity since the dawn of civilization. There is no safer, more consistent, and reliable asset than gold. Instead, what I'm trying to say is more nuanced. In our modern day and age, people are used to stability and prosperity. We haven't seen a major crisis since World War II. However, people are increasingly waking up to the potential that this stability will not last indefinitely. To protect themselves from stock market collapse, hyperinflation, sovereign debt crisis, and war, more and more people are buying gold. That has led to its insane price jump. But what's also true is that if crisis genuinely jeopardizes the system and power structures in place, gold confiscation almost always ensues. If you think I'm a fearmonger, think about this important distinction. In a crisis that the system can manage, like the dot-com bubble or 2008, you're fine. But if it's a systemic crisis that brings the system to the brink, like the Great Depression, you can be certain that the elites will do everything to get your gold. So, how should you keep your gold? To be honest, the best way to protect yourself from government confiscation is to have a house far away from civilization with a safe and some guns to protect it. At least that's much more difficult to seize for the government than some ETF. Personally, I don't think a major collapse is right around the corner. Definitely, we have to have some major correction for our massive government debts and aging populations, but that probably is still some years away. Instead, if you own gold ETFs, just understand the risks, and if crisis does hit, be prepared to act with a plan. Have an understanding that you cannot just chill on gold and hope for the best. Maybe this is anticlimactic, but otherwise, there's no perfectly safe way to own gold. Human history is full of conquest and warfare to get as much gold as possible, and that will likely never change. So just be alert and be prepared. And on that note, that's the end of the video, gentlemen. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed, please like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.